Sarvasya Chaura hridayasya Hare Krishna, Hare
Thank you. That was so beautiful, Kusum. I just couldn't believe it was just you singing. It was just so beautiful. Thank you so much. Radhakunda, Varshana, Kusum, Rai, that was just amazing. Thank you so much. Wow.
Rai, do you want to speak a few words about the Ashtakam?
We have the translation. We can read that.
Yeah, please.
It's really, really sweet. I love it.
Yeah, it was. Because many of us don't know. I didn't even know the words. I was just hearing the tune and the words. But I would like to hear the translation. Yes.
I offer my respectful obeisances to that foremost of thieves, who is famous in Vraja as the butterthief, and he who steals the gopis' clothes, and who, for those who take shelter of him, steals the sins which have occurred through many lifetimes. I offer my respectful obeisances to the foremost of thieves, who steals Shrimati Radhika's heart, who steals the dark luster of a fresh rain cloud, and who steals all the sins and sufferings of those who take shelter of his feet. He who turns his surrendered devotees into paupers and wandering, homeless beggars, alas, such a fearsome thief has never been seen or heard of on all the three worlds. Mere utterance of his name purges one of a mountain of sins. Such an astonishingly wonderful thief I have never seen or heard of anywhere. O thief, having stolen my wealth, my honor, my senses, my life, and my everything, where can you run to? I have caught you within the rope of my devotion. You cut the terrible noose of Yamaraj, you sever the dreadful noose of material existence, and you slash everyone's material bondage, but you are unable to cut the knot fastened by your own loving devotees. O stealer of my everything, O thief, today I have imprisoned you in the miserable prison house of my heart, which is very fearful due to the terrible darkness of my ignorance, and therefore for a very long time you will remain, receiving appropriate punishment for your crimes of thievery. O Krishna, thief of my everything, the noose of my devotion remaining forever tight, you will continue to reside in the prison house of my heart, because I will not release you for millions of years.
Thank you very much. So this is a special Ashtakam that is sung during Purushottama Mass. This is by Bilvamangala Thakura, right?
I think so, yeah.
Do you sing this every day, right?
Oh, during this time.
Really?
10 times it.
Yeah, I meant during the Purushottama Mass. Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start with our discussion on the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Agyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mukham karoti vacharam, pangam langate girim, yat kripatamaham vande, Shri Guru Dinataranam, Paramanandam Madhavam. So we are starting with the 8th chapter today, Attaining the Supreme. So as usual, we'll do a quick recap. So this is in the second section of the Bhagavad Gita that comes under the general title of Bhakti. And these are 6 chapters. So we did the 7th chapter last week, which was the knowledge of the Absolute. The title of today's chapter is Attaining the Supreme. And then we have the 9th chapter, which is the most confidential knowledge. 10th chapter is the opulence of the Absolute. 11th chapter is the universal form. And the 12th chapter is devotional service. So just like we memorized the titles of the first 6 chapters, by the end of the section, we should also have memorized the title of these 6 chapters. So recap in terms of what we did. So there were 2 sections. In chapter 7, they were knowing Krishna and not knowing Krishna. Basically, Krishna talked about knowing him, the advantages of knowing him, the kinds of people that know him, and also the kinds of people that do not know him. So the 3 steps in knowing Krishna, this was established right at the opening of the chapter, which was to hear with faith and practice, which essentially is the basis of building one's devotional service. Is that one hears from the disciplic succession, one hears with faith, and then one acts upon what one hears. And these three things together help one in knowing the personality of Godhead. So Krishna then talks about his relationship with the world. And then he summarizes it basically by saying that he's the basis of everything. Material and spiritual. He creates, he maintains, and he destroys. So Krishna presents himself as the essence of everything. Why? That is to help us appreciate him. When he says that he's the sound in the ether, he's the taste in the water, he's the light and the heat of fire. So these are things that we can see around ourselves, that we can empirically observe, and then it allows us to relate to Krishna through them. And Krishna also makes the point that just like there are certain defining characteristics of everything, he is the defining characteristics of all that is there. So just like water without its taste or fire without its heat is not really what it is. So similarly, everything that we have has its essence because of its relationship with Krishna. Then he talks about 4 kinds of people who turn to Krishna. So those who are distressed, they're in some kind of hardship, and they pray to Krishna for help. Or those who are needy, they want wealth or fame or education, so they pray to Krishna to get more. And then there's the inquisitive, the jigyasur, who want to know more about Krishna. And then there is the jnanis, the one who is in knowledge, who have an understanding of who Krishna is and aspire to establish a relationship with him. And of the 4 kinds, he says that the one who is in knowledge is most dear to him. Then there are 4 kinds of people who do not turn to Krishna. So those who are very much absorbed in material pursuits. So they have no time. For those who are atheists, they don't accept the existence of God. Or mental speculators, those who, because of their speculation, question everything without basis. And then finally, those who are just envious, they're just averse to God. And then he talks about 2 more kinds of people who surrender but not to Krishna. And these are those who surrender to the devas. Why? Because they're looking for short-term material gains. And even though these gains are temporary, even though they are ultimately given by Krishna, but because of the lack of understanding, they do not surrender to Krishna, but to the devas. And then there is the second kind, who are the impersonalists. So they surrender to the Brahman, to the impersonal aspect. So, for the verse, I think we have a volunteer today for the verse. Avinash Prabhu.
Okay, 7:14. Devi Hasya Gunamai Mamamaya Data Deyatada mamev yi prapadya maya etam trata te. The divine, I have a divine energy of God. I have a divine energy which consists 3 modes of material nodes, which are hard to overcome. But if you surrender at me, you can easily cross it.
Thank you. So Avinash Prabhu was sharing that this is the very first verse that he has ever memorized.
That's right. First,
Spent all day doing it.
Spent all day, learn it.
Okay, thank you. Very nice.
Thank you.
Okay, so quick summarization of the 7th chapter. That this is where Krishna begins to speak about himself. He was so far speaking about the jiva, karma, gyan, astang, but centered on the jiva. Now he begins to speak about himself, and he does so in order to establish the basis of bhakti, because bhakti is only in relationship to Krishna. So we have to know that what is the subject of our devotion. So Krishna elaborates on that beginning from the 7th chapter. And he first talks about himself in the context of the manifest material world. So even though Krishna exists primarily in the spiritual realm, but because we are existing currently primarily in the material realm, so he first speaks about himself in the material realm. How can we see him in the material world? So when he says that, when he talks about the ability of man and the taste of water, so these are all things that are there in the material world that we interact with, and we can relate to Krishna. Then he also speaks about those, the kind of people who accept him and reject him. And then we saw that the difference really is the frame of mind. So there is not much difference between the desires of a materialist and a artharthi, the one who is looking for material gains. There's not much difference between one who is jigyasur and inquisitive and one who is maya partha jnana, who is bewildered by knowledge. The difference is, where do they turn for sustenance? In one case, if somebody needs material gains, they turn to Krishna, and then the devotional life begins. And in another case, they turn away from Krishna, and they remain caught in the material life. So that's the basic difference. That where do you turn to? Where do you draw your sustenance from? And ultimately, all these tendencies are within us. So even though he speaks about 10 kinds of people, 4 kinds of people who accept, 4 kinds of people who reject, 2 kinds of people who accept somebody else and not him. But there are these kinds of people, but there are also these propensities within us. So ultimately, he is asking us to look within ourselves to see that how can we turn more and more towards Krishna for anything and everything. Prabhupada would say that it's not good to go to Krishna for material things, but better to go to Krishna for material things than to go elsewhere. Why? Because at least you're going to Krishna. So devotees also have material desires. They may also have speculative tendencies. They definitely have traces of aversion. But they are situated that they are able to carry all of them in their journey towards Krishna. And then the perfection of, he says, the perfection of yoga is to be connected to Krishna. So we'll start with the 8th chapter, which is titled Attaining the Supreme. It's one of the very sweet chapters in Bhagavad Gita. So how is it connected from the previous chapter? So in the previous chapter, knowledge of the absolute, we saw that Krishna was giving Arjuna information about himself as the goal of bhakti. Now he explains the process of attaining. So once a person knows about Krishna, then the natural succession is that how do I reconnect with Krishna? How do I establish a relationship with him? And in this chapter, Krishna gives the process of attaining. So it's divided into 2 sections. The first is attaining Krishna. It's a short chapter of only 28 verses. And the first 15 verses are attaining Krishna. And the second section is a description of the destination. That what does attaining Krishna mean? Where does it take us? So A and D, that's the mnemonic, attaining Krishna and destination. So before Krishna talks about the process of attaining him, he first is trying or will try and establish some of the tattvas, some of the building blocks of the process of attaining him. And this is essentially a series of question answers between Arjuna and Krishna. So Arjuna says, can you explain this? Can you explain this? He asks for 7 kinds of questions. And in answering that, Krishna will first kind of establish the lay of the land, the basic tattvas. So he first begins with the body. That so Arjun asks that what is it that the jiva is in? And says, this is your gross material body that is made of the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. This is the body that is visible to everybody. This is the body that interacts with other body. It's the material existence of the soul. Now, within the body, there is a subtle body. And the subtle body contains the nature of the person. So maybe the person may be humorous, maybe chivalrous, intellectual, angry. So different people have different swabhav, different nature. And that is not really anything to do with the gross body. So it's not necessary that a tall person will be humorous, or a short person will be intelligent. The subtle body has its own existence independent of the gross body. So just like the gross body is made of the Panchabhutas, earth, water, fire, air, ether, the subtle body is made of mind, intelligence, and false ego. And this essentially is the swabhav of the person. The third is the jiva. So the jiva is the soul, the spirit soul that is residing within the gross body and the subtle body. It is different from both of them in the sense that while the gross and subtle body are completely material, the jiva is completely spiritual, which is why we say spirit soul, because it has no material component to it. So that is the third existence in a person. Then there is the Paramatma. So the jiva is not alone in the body. It is accompanied by an expansion of Krishna that is known as the super soul or Paramatma. So it is the super soul that is actually manipulating the gross and the subtle body based on the desires of the jiva. Because the jiva is completely spiritual, it has nothing to do with the material body. It in fact does not know how to interact with the material elements. But being a soul, it has the intrinsic quality of having desires. And these desires are authorized and executed by the Paramatma. So the jiva has unlimited desires, and not all of them fructify. So a jiva in a body of a human may want to fly, but the Paramatma will not sanction that. But wants to walk? Yes, the Paramatma will sanction that. So we have the gross body, we have the subtle body, we have the spirit soul, and then we have the super soul. Paramatma is also called the super soul. In addition to these 5 things, we have the cycle of karma. So karma, Krishna defines as that which gives you another body. Now there are many ways that we have perceived karma. Activities that we do, or to fulfill our desires, what do we do? And they are all understanding of karma. But the core definition of karma that Krishna gives is all those activities that result in the creation of a material body. So earlier on, we had studied about nishkam karma. How is that different from karma? Nishkam karma does not give you another body. Because there is no kam, there is no desire, the soul is not forced to take another birth to fulfill that desire. But as long as there is desires, whether they are pious or impious, the soul will be forced to again and again take a gross body, a subtle body, be accompanied by Paramatma, and manifest itself again in the material world, and again be in this cycle of karma. And the last thing to understand is the presence of Krishna. And Krishna says, all this is being done under my supervision. So Krishna expands as the Paramatma and accompanies the jiva. Krishna has set the law of karma. The ingredients of the material body and the subtle body, they come from Krishna. So these are the building blocks in understanding how to attain the Supreme. And we'll see why Krishna is building these blocks. But he wants this to be clearly understood by Arjuna and by us of our existence in the material world. that we take on a body that is completely separate from us. That has nothing to do with us. We have a nature, a swabha, which is also material, which is separate from the gross body, but also separate from the spirit soul. And the spirit soul is residing almost as a captive in the cage of the gross and the subtle body. And Krishna is kindly accompanying the jiva and executing all that he deserves to desire. And by these activities that he is doing, he is getting caught in this cycle of birth and rebirth. And all this is being done by Krishna. So I see that Akshay had a comment to make, or did you accidentally raise your hand, Prabhu?
No, I had a question, Prabhuji.
Sure, go ahead.
So, Prabhuji, I always tend to struggle when it comes to this subtle body, mind, intelligence, and soul. I feel that I completely work on sensual and mental platform only. When we come to Krishna consciousness, how do we identify which one is pushing you to take the decisions, or steering your life? How do we try to not listen, or train ourselves not to listen to the mind versus listen to jiva?
Thank you, Prabhu. It's a good question. And you're absolutely right, because this relationship between the jiva, the gross body, and the subtle body, it's a very close relationship. Now, with the gross body, the relationship is relatively short. That it lived there for maybe 70, 80, 100 years. But with the subtle body, the relationship is since time immemorial, which is why it becomes very, very intimate and very difficult to distill. That what is the jiva saying? What is the mind saying? So then what do we do? That if we have a source that is not trustworthy, then we turn to a source that is trustworthy. Which is why when we start our practices in bhakti, we listen to Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So regardless of what our mind is telling us to do, or regardless to what we say that I'm intuitively feeling like this, or I think I should be doing this, if we submit to the guidance and instruction from an undisturbed source, that way we know we are safe. Typically, I have seen in my experience that when discussing with devotees or aspiring devotees, the stronger the surrender to spiritual authority is, the quicker the progress is. And the other way around, that the more the people say, for instance, I remember many years ago, we were having a discussion with this person on Bhagavad Gita. And then she was saying that I refuse to study anybody's purports because I feel that person is coming between me and Krishna. So I just read the Sanskrit and I go with my own realization. Sanskrit in the sense, the English translation. And then I go with my own realization. And then my question was that how can you trust your own realization? That if a person is unwell, it's difficult for the person to diagnose. At the most, what you can say is, these are my symptoms, but difficult to diagnose. So that's how we protect ourselves. That we develop faith in the instructions of the Guru, in the words of Krishna in the Shastra, in what the devotees we are associating with are doing, and the testimony of our commitment is how well do we follow those instructions.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. So it really comes down to association and trying to apply to what the devotees are saying versus trying to spin something by what comes to our own mind.
Yes.
Is that right?
Exactly. Thank you. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay. So now that Krishna has established the building blocks, he will now talk about the process of transmigration, which is the process of the soul leaving one body and going into another. And then we'll see that all these factors that he has described play different roles in the transmigration of a soul from one body to another. So interestingly, the 8th chapter, which is knowledge of the absolute or attaining the supreme, is essentially a chapter on transmigration. Why? Because that is also happens to be the process by which one can attain Krishna. So when you transmigrate, you leave a body and go somewhere else. Now, what that somewhere else is what you are attaining. That you leave your body and you go into the body of a demigod, that's what you are attaining. Or if you leave your body and go into your spiritual body, then that is what you are attaining. So that is why Krishna will essentially explain the process of transmigration and how it can be leveraged in attaining him. So how does this process work? Now we know that within the gross body, there is the jiva that is living. And then at the time of death, the Paramatma now begins to initiate the process of transmigration. So how does that happen? The first thing that happens is that the jiva leaves the gross body along with the subtle body. Actually, the jiva is carried by the subtle body. The spirit soul is carried by the subtle body outside the gross body. So once the soul leaves the body becomes a dead lump of matter. It has no consciousness, no ability to enjoy or suffer, does not become agitated by heat or cold. It's just jad or matter. Then what happens next? The Paramatma, based on karma. So remember, all these concepts Krishna has explained to Arjuna in the opening verses. So now the Paramatma looks at all the activities that were done by the jiva. And by all means that all the activities, not just in this lifetime, but previous lifetime, previous to previous. So all the karma that are still not fructified, the Paramatma looks at it. And the Paramatma looks at the desires of the jiva. So the role that Paramatma is continuously playing is desire and deserve. So the jiva has so many desires. So a particular jiva may desire to become Indra, or some jiva may want to become Brahma, or some jiva may want to become a king. So there are so many desires in the jiva. But what he deserves is determined by the karma. That do you have enough of piety in your bank account to fulfill these desires? Or do you have sinful activities that you have to suffer the results? And based on that, the process of transmigration happens from the human form of life to one of the other 8.4 million species of life. So this is the process of transmigration explained by Krishna. So here you will see that all the components are in play here. There is the gross body that is discarded. There is the subtle body that carries the spirit soul out of the gross body. There is the Paramatma that looks at what the jiva desires and what he deserves based on his karma. And then based on that, the soul now enters into yet another body. So now Krishna connects this process of transmigration to a singular event. So we saw that Paramatma is looking at the desires, at the karma, but what he says is that all these activities, the karmic activities, and all the desires that the person has, they collapse into one singularity, which is the consciousness of the jiva at the time of death. And this is what determines the next body of the jiva. So Krishna is explaining this systematically through the process of building the fundamentals and then using those fundamentals to build the higher level of understanding. So first he explained that the process of transmigration is determined by the karmic activity and the desires of the jiva. And then he says that actually the process of transmigration is determined by the consciousness of the person at the time of death. But the consciousness is determined by these two things, by the karmic activities and by the desires. So essentially it's the same, but yet there is a difference. The consciousness is a manifestation of these two. So it is the same, but there is a difference also, which is what the jiva can leverage to go back to Krishna, which will come up subsequently. I see that a couple of devotees had questions, so please go ahead.
Prabhu, Prabhu, this is Avinash. I have a question. I raised hand. You said that after death, the body enters another. After death, it enters another body. When you said another body, does he enter the human body, or does he enter into animal body, or what body he enters?
Yes, so whoever is answering correctly. It's based on your karma. So,
but I understand, but every year there is more and more population, where does all these souls are coming from?
there is this, there is the, so there is two ways to understand it. One is that, so for instance, there is a person who leads a sinful life, and then he gets the body of an animal. Now, animals, they do not have any karma because they don't have fever. So the movement of the soul through the various species of animals is time bound. It's automatic. So gradually, the soul, it moves from one species to another species to another species. And then finally, it comes to a particular species from which it will enter into a human form. So that happens on its own. The second point that Prabhupada would say is that the Earth is just one of the planets in the universe. So there are souls that are constantly transmigrating across different planetary systems. So for instance, if there is a soul on Earth that has led a very pious life, then after birth, he will take the body of if that is what he desires, he takes the body of a demigod, which means he goes to the planets of the demigods. And then conversely, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned, it'll be mentioned in the 9th chapter, that when the demigods live their life, at the end of their life, they fall down. And they fall down to lower forms of life, one of which is the human form of life. So there is this transmigration that is happening across different species, across different planets, and even across different universes.
Thank you. I think I got my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu. Akshay Prabhu? Okay, I think maybe I raised my mistake. Any other comments? Okay, so here we have understood the process of how the consciousness at the time of death determines the next body that the soul will take. So now Krishna, he expands on this point, that the consciousness at the time of death is determining the next body that the soul will take. So if we were to think about Krishna, or put it differently, if we were Krishna conscious at the time of death, then our destination would be with Krishna. So this is the secret of attaining the Supreme. That if somehow or else we are able to focus our mind on Krishna at the time of leaving our body, then without any doubt, we will go back to Krishna. And because Krishna is in the spiritual world, what it means is that we will go back to the spiritual world. So the next question that comes is that how to prepare for death. So Arjun hears this and he's excited. He says, okay, now the question is that how do I fix my consciousness on you at the time of death? Now, it is difficult to artificially will yourself to acquire a certain consciousness. And it's not elaborated in the Bhagavad Gita, but in the other scriptures it is elaborated about what happens at the time of death. That how the mind is completely bewildered. How there is so much of anxiety that the soul and the subtle body had been living in this body, developed so much of attraction to the body and to those that were connected to the body. And now it is going into some area that it does not know. So one might, after listening to Krishna's key to attaining the Supreme, one might say that it's a very simple thing. I can lead a life as I want, which is any way I want. Sinful, pious, Krishna conscious, not Krishna conscious, doesn't matter. All that I have to do is that, okay, I say I'm dying now, Hare Krishna, and I'm back with Krishna. But actually, that is never going to happen. So it's like a student who has to give an exam, and without preparing the whole year for the exam, he goes in and he says that I'll go there and I'll read the questions and I will somehow or else answer them correctly. It's never going to happen. And even when we are living, we have glimpses of that. So when we are in moments of anxiety, where does the mind go to? And we can check ourselves. Like even small things like we're walking and we slip. Where does the mind go to? It goes to the body. That I may get hurt, or the hands may reach out to protect. How many times will your mind go to Krishna when you have slipped and you're about to fall? Never. Or for the most people, never. So, and these are relatively minor incidents. So the event of death is that incident magnified 1,000,000 times over. So unless the person has practiced their entire life to develop the consciousness that goes to Krishna automatically, whether in happiness or in distress, whether in peace or in agitation, regardless of whatever happened, it automatically goes to Krishna. That is the only way that one can be assured that at the time of death, the consciousness will go to the personality of Godhead. Otherwise, it will go to where it has been trained to go throughout one's life. It will go to where one's attraction is. Prabhupada once said that most of the men take birth as women after they die. Because when they're dying and they're thinking, what will happen to my wife? Or what will happen to to my daughter, or because of that affection that comes from dependence. And that's what their consciousness is, and that's what the body they get. So then Krishna begins to explain that how to prepare to train your consciousness to think about him at the time of death. And he goes back to what he had spoken in the 6th chapter, which is Astanga Yoga. Because essentially, that is what Astanga Yoga is all about. It is about being able to control where your mind goes at the time of death. So the yogis, they sit and they sit and they practice and they practice and they meditate. And finally, when their practice has become so strong that they have reached the stage of samadhi, where effortlessly the mind is going to where they want it to go, then they leave the body. And they control their next body. So Krishna speaks about those who meditate on the Brahman. So these are yogis who meditate on the Omkara. So Krishna says that they recite the symbol Om and they meditate on his impersonal aspect. And then they give up their body and they enter into the impersonal Brahman. Then there are those who meditate on the Paramatma situated within their heart. And when they give up their body, they enter into Brahmaloka. And then there are those who meditate on Krishna. But regardless of who that they are meditating on, both Krishna and Arjuna in the 6th chapter have already established that this process is not only very long, but it is very difficult also. It is one that takes several lifetimes, and the chances of failures are very, very high. So Krishna presents this because it is a bona fide way to fix one's consciousness at the time of death. But then he presents the other way, which is the process of bhakti. So he says that if the jiva lives his life absorbed in the various angas of bhakti, like the study of the scriptures, like the association with devotees, chanting of the holy name, aspiring to live in a holy place, worshipping deities. So if you look at it, that what are all these processes doing? They're essentially training our mind to go to Krishna again and again and again. When we read the scriptures, we develop the conviction. Like we're reading the Bhagavad Gita, we develop the conviction of the need to go to Krishna. And of course, when we read Krishna Katha, when we read Bhagavatam, we read the pastimes of Krishna, then our mind goes to Krishna. It gets absorbed in Krishna's naughtiness, in the Damodar Leela, or Krishna's chivalry in Mahabharata. So it goes again and again to Krishna. Similarly, when we are associating with the devotees, the association with devotees is so powerful because when you look at a devotee, you're automatically reminded of Krishna. You see the person in connection with the Supreme Lord. When you talk to the devotees, you talk Krishna Katha there. So that is also surrounding yourself with Krishna, chanting the holy name. We do jap. We do 1 hour, 2 hour, whatever we do. And this is our solitary, exclusive connection with Krishna. We say Krishna's name, we hear it, and as it is said, that between the mouth and the ear is the mind. So we say it, we hear it, we say it, we hear it, and even though the mind may not be interested, but it is there on the way. Whether it likes it or not, Krishna's name goes over it again and again and again. So it automatically becomes to get absorbed in Krishna. Then deity worship. We have deities at home. Every time you cross the deities, say Hare Krishna, or Gaurnitai ki Jai, or Jai Radha Madan Mohan. So just by their presence, the deities are reminding you again and again of Krishna. And then living in a holy place. We go for tirthas or yatras, or we try to make our house a holy place. And there are, of course, other ways also. We go on Harinam Sankirtan, or we serve prasadam, we honor prasadam. So there are so many ways that are authorized, that are designed to develop this meditation on Krishna. So when a person has lived his entire life surrounded by these activities that are performed joyfully, then anytime the mind has the need to go anywhere, it goes to where it has been going throughout its life. It goes to the shelter of Krishna. And that's where it will go at the time of death. So, why does Krishna talk about death over here? So, it is important because it is the time for the change of bodies. And the new body that a person gets is based on the consciousness at the time of death. And the consciousness is the involuntary result of how the life has been lived. So it is essentially a combination of one's desires and karma. And the yogis, they spend several lifetimes training to control their consciousness. And the devotees, they live their lives in a way that the consciousness by itself goes to Krishna. And Krishna helps. So not only are the activities that the devotees use to train themselves relishable, so unlike the yogis who have to perform difficult austerities, the devotees, the activities that they're doing, they're relishable. Reading the Shastra, chanting, associating with devotees, honoring prasadam. So they're all relishable. There is no great austerity there. And in addition, there's Krishna actively helping also. He continues to bestow his mercy in terms of developing a taste, in terms of reciprocating. And that's how the devotees are able to fix their mind on Krishna. So this is the end of the first section, which is essentially the entire chapter. The other section is a brief summary of the destination of attaining Krishna. So I'll pause here and see if there is any discussion. I think I saw Ravi Prabhu had a comment to make. Okay, perhaps.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, you mentioned that while explaining all these 5 parameters that decides our next destination. And Krishna connects the process of transmigration to a singular event. And you mentioned that like the jiva and the subtle body, like how they unite karma and desires. So that part I was not clear, Prabhuji, like what do you mean by singular event?
Not sure I understand your question.
Earlier you explained that jiva leaves the gross body along with the subtle body. It leaves that gross body. At that time, Paramatma sees what is the karma of that jiva in a way that is deserving capacity and what desires he carries. Based on those two things, he sanctions another body. And while explaining, so now this process of transmigration is explained. Krishna uses this approach to connect, how jiva can set his consciousness to go back to him. So at that time, you mentioned that Krishna connects the process of transmigration to a singular event. And in the slide, you are kind of mentioning that jiva with subtle body, karma and desires, these three things. So is it kind of like making it to so that singular event means I didn't get, are we making, so desires and karma, all things unite, or is there anything I missed out? So
I think I understand your question. So the singular event is the consciousness at the time of death. So the way Krishna explains it is that the karma and the desires determine the next body. And then he says that actually the karma and the desires, they determine the consciousness at the time of death, which determines the next body. So that's how Krishna changes the focus of the discussion to the consciousness of the jiva at the point of death. Now, the point that he's making is that this consciousness is actually a result of these two. They're not separate. So what one's karma has been, if somebody has lived a pious life, then that will automatically engender a certain kind of consciousness. And the desires, whatever the jiva desires, that will composite into that consciousness. And then that determines the next body.
Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you very much, Prabhuji. It is helpful.
Okay. I think Shivani had a question or a comment.
Yeah.
Shivani had a comment that death is also the ultimate truth, and he wants us to be prepared. Yes, and that's why Krishna is speaking about it. It's a topic that is a little unpleasant because not everybody likes to sit and discuss about this. But as they say that, there are different platitudes that come, that death is the final test, and death is where everything ends and begins. So yes, it is a pun intended. It's a life-changing event. So so Krishna wants us to be aware of it, not because we become depressed, but because we are able to use it to our advantage. Okay, any other questions, comments?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. That last bullet of Krishna helps, I think that is also very important, right? Because I think that's the mercy factor, because how much ever effort we put as aspiring devotees and devotees, ultimately it's the Krishna's mercy also. So that's where I was thinking, like when you gave the example of a student studying for the, not studying for the exam, and then it will not automatically, he will not automatically pass. But vice versa also, he may study very hard, but end of the day, it is at least over there is no surety. But I was then thinking, at least in this process, if we sincerely take to Krishna consciousness, I'm sure there is surety, and Krishna will be benevolent to his devotees.
Yes. And in the next chapter, Krishna will give all these assurances. He'll say that, look, it's good if you study, but even if you don't study, I'll help you in the exam. So he starts giving these assurances. But in the other processes, it's all up to yourself. So if you make it on your own, which is another reason why they are difficult to do. So intrinsically, they are difficult, they are lengthy, they take a lot of time, and you're on your own. So these are the points that Krishna is. That is why he spoke the first 6 chapters also, to talk about the difficulty of the jivas in its endeavors. And now he starts talking about the help that he can give. Thank you. That's a good point. Okay. So if you don't have any further questions, let's move to the next section. So the first section, Attaining Krishna, we did. So in the concluding chapter, and I just have one slide on it, because Krishna describes the spiritual world. He contrasts it with the material world. So whatever that is lacking in the material world is there in the spiritual world. And whatever that is good in the material world is even better in the spiritual world. So he talks about how his dham, his destination, the spiritual world, is eternal. So there is no birth, death, disease, and old age. These are the 4 things that are constantly going on in the material world. And birth is, of course, one is not consciously aware of it, but nobody likes death, disease, or old age, but yet it happens. And all this is conspicuous by its absence in the spiritual world. Then it's full of bliss. There's no envy, anger, or hatred. And everybody is cooperating with everybody. There is no jealousy. There is no envy. There is no hatred. Things that we are so used to in the material world, but still we suffer from it, life after life. Then the biggest assurance that he gives, no fall down. He says, once you come to my abode, you always stay there. That's the biggest assurance. Because every other place in the material world is temporary. He says, right from the topmost planet of Brahma to the lowermost Patal Lok. So they're all places of repeated birth, death, and suffering. So the demigods fall down from the heavenly planets. The humans, they can leave the human form, fall down to animal form. Or if they live sinful activities, they can go to hellish planets. So there is constant flux going on. There is no permanency. Once you reach the spiritual world, then you are good for eternity. And then Krishna says that it can only be attained by unalloyed devotion, which is a summation of all that he has spoken in this chapter. So this is the second part about describing the destination. So summary of the chapter. So Krishna had spoken previously in the 7th chapter about himself as the ultimate goal. And then he now speaks about the process to reach him, which is the fact that the consciousness of a person at the time of death determines the next body. Material consciousness will result in a material body, and Krishna consciousness will take one back to the spiritual world. Now, one can become a yogi to fix one's consciousness through samadhi, or the easy way is to become a devotee. So we see Krishna laying down the foundations of practicing bhakti. So the verse to memorize for this is Antakale cha mameva smarana mukta kalevaram ya prayati samadbhavam yati nasti atra samshaya. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body, remembering me alone, at once attains my nature. Of this there is no doubt. So Krishna emphasizes over here that yati nasti atra samshaya. Now when Krishna is speaking, there is obviously no doubt. But in order to emphasize the importance of this point, he is restating that this statement is absolute. So that is why we see that people they try to go to Vrindavan to give up their body. There are actually hospice centers established over there so that people can give up their body in Vrindavan. And we also see, especially amongst devotees, when they're about to give up their body, the other devotees, they surround them, they do kirtan, they do readings of the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita. So of this there is no doubt that if one ends his life thinking of Krishna, at once he will attain the supreme abode of Krishna. So this is a verse that we should memorize. Antakale cha mameva smarana mukta kalevaram ya prayati samadbhavam yati nasti atra samshaya. So the important points that are takeaways from this, the two sections in the 8th chapter, which is attaining Krishna and the description of the destination. Attaining Krishna is by anchoring our consciousness into Krishna at the time of death, and the destination is the spiritual world. How is one's next body determined? By the consciousness at the time of death. What determines the consciousness at the time of death? Karma, swabhav, and the desires of the jiva. So the swabhav determines, in a way, determines the karma and is determined by the desires. Two methods to fix consciousness: by samadhi through Astanga yoga or by bhakti yoga. How does the soul transmigrate? The Paramatma causes the soul and the subtle body to enter a new body depending on the consciousness. And how does the spiritual world differ from the material world? The spiritual world is eternal, conscious, and blissful. Sat, Chit, and Anand. So this brings us to the end of the chapter. And so before we conclude for Nursing Day prayers, just want to see if there's any concluding thoughts. Yeah, Shivani, go ahead. When you talk about spiritual world, is it Golok or Vaikuntha? So even that is determined based on the consciousness. That if we develop faith or if we develop attachment to Lord Vishnu, then we go to Vaikuntha, which is the abode of Lord Vishnu. And if we develop attachment to Krishna, then we go to Golok Vrindavan. So ultimately, it comes down to where our Sakti is. Where is it that we have developed our faith and affection in? If we die thinking of the two-armed form of Krishna with Shrimati Radharani in Golok Vrindavan, then that's where we will go back. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, then let me. So for the Narsingadev prayer, we have Aditi. I'm trying to see how to stop the Facebook.